It looks like we're good. Awesome, you told him to reload. Perfect. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the CG Cookie live stream. This one's specifically in the Blender realm of topics that we cover. So welcome. We've got a special full house today with 4 total people. We've got Lampel, Jonathan Lampel on the upper left of your screen, Jonathan Williamson, bottom left, and Wayne Dixon from Australia in the bottom right. And so we're talking today about relationship statuses, specifically how the artist relates to his tools, and for us, how we relate to Blender and other 3D software in general, some of our history and what we've learned about that, and some of the pros and cons about the different types of relationships, I guess. Just kind of a funny topic in general. Us and our tools. So we wanted to discuss that, and I've heard from these guys that they have some thoughts on that as well. So to get the ball rolling, I'm going to start with a very brief presentation of, I've been getting in the habit of making these. And so yeah, defining our relationship with Blender, a conversation about artists and their tools. So I wanted to kind of define, as I was thinking through my thoughts on this, a spectrum that I have experienced and seen in the world of 3D specifically, and the plethora of tools and various different users and artists that use those tools. And so I wanted to start first, but guys, by the way, if you don't see this presentation, the guys I'm streaming with, you can watch it, I guess, on the site. I don't think I can show it to you easily. But sorry about that.
Yep, I'm watching our stream.
Okay, cool. So the first kind of one side of the spectrum I define as utilitarian. And this is a type where you don't know enough to prefer one tool or another. You just need something that works and something that's easily accessible. And I can attest to this. This is how I got into 3D, and also how I transitioned to being a professional in 3D. So when I first got into 3D, I didn't even know what terminology was what, how to search for modeling. I just knew what I wanted to create in my mind, but didn't know how to search for it. So I was just looking for anything and everything that could offer it. I remember going to Best Buy looking for 3D tools, asking for the guy who worked there to help me find 3D software, and he just gave me blank stares. And I don't know, I had some Disney Painter nonsense that claimed to be 3D, but it was not anything of the sort. And then each new piece of software that came, I just wanted it. Okay, yeah, that does something new. And so I was very utilitarian. I didn't care what it was. Just let me have it and let me see what I can do with it. So the pros of this approach is it's highly objective, highly open-minded. And the cons are kind of how I started, which was which two I start with, which is going to lead me down the best path quickest kind of thing, and with the least cost to me. And so that can potentially lead to like analysis paralysis sort of situation. And then I mentioned that I experienced this when I transitioned to being a professional. Coming from a preferential side of a relationship, I liked Maya, and I liked a lot of professional tools that I learned in school. When I became a professional and realized I couldn't afford those tools, I quickly transitioned back to utilitarian, and that's where Blender came in handy. So utilitarian is a spectrum, and there's going to be pros and cons of each. I'm not saying that either one's worse than the others, but just to define kind of the conversation and what we're talking about. Next is preferential. This is kind of the middle of the spectrum, in my opinion, where you've grown comfortable with a particular tool over time. You're starting to get results. You're creating the things that you want to, and that's exciting. And your efficiency is improving as you're getting those results. And the pros of this stage is, or this part of the spectrum is, you're productive. You're starting to be familiar, but you're also still open to other tools. And the cons being a bias can perhaps begin to grow with that preference, leaving you starting to close your mind, giving you a little bit of tunnel vision towards your preference. And this defines my time in college, where I had a preference, which was Maya. That's what our school taught us. But I could not, it was like a secondary hobby where I was finding all kinds of new 3D software, installing it, doing a simple project with it, just so I could put it on my resume, so I could get my hands in all kinds of software. So I had a preference, but I was still trying other things, trying a lot of other things. So that was a unique time in my my personal kind of history with 3D software. And then Affectionate is the other end of the spectrum. And this kind of becomes a fanboy realm where you've been using the same software for years. And this, you know, even I can think of like beyond 3D stuff, like carpenters who like a specific type of tool brand, or I don't know, athletic person, an athlete, how about that, who likes a certain type of shoe. So like this, you know everything about the tool, exactly how to do whatever you want to with it. It's like second nature working with this. It's an extension of your own hand and mind. And the pros of this is your peak productivity, peak familiarity, and efficiency. You're just amazing with this particular software. The cons is your bias towards this particular tool can start to cloud your judgment of what is a best tool of potential other workflows that you might be excluding yourself from just by being closed-minded towards this specific tool. And then also there's a kind of a closed-mindedness, even an antagonism towards other tools. You can start to see these like software wars break out sometimes in forums or even among colleagues. I've been a part of those myself. And so let's see, I thought I had another one just for a second. Oh yeah, so in a professional realm, if you are affectionate towards your favorite tool, it can make the transition to other tools. If you go to a studio or land a freelance gig where they are not using your tool and that's an immovable reality, you can have a really hard time transitioning. So that's another negative I just kind of thought of. But all right, so I wanted to define the spectrum and almost pitch it to the guys who are with me. They haven't seen this yet, but to get the ball rolling, like, what do you guys think of these kind of stages of relationship? And if you had experience in them, where do you land on the spectrum? What do you guys think?
I mean, I can start. It sounds really familiar.
Okay, good.
You know, I was thinking back to like when I started in Blender, I absolutely started on the utilitarian side in that Blender was what I used because it was basically what I stumbled across and it was what I had available. Mm-hmm. You know, early on, the first non-Blender package for animation that I remember like wanting to try and use and really focusing on was Lightwave. And for the longest time in my mind, and keep in mind, this is like 2003, 2005, Lightwave was the epitome of what I wanted to use. It's every production that I knew used Lightwave. It was the high end of the high end.
Okay.
And I was a high school kid at the time and had no ability to purchase Lightwave. My parents absolutely were not going to purchase Lightwave for me. And so it was just this, oh, well, okay. Oh, I won't use it yet, but one day when I'm professional, I'll buy Lightwave. And then lo and behold, you know.
How's that going?
That's pretty funny. Lightwave. So did you say how you discovered Lightwave, by the way?
I don't actually remember. I think that I saw it in either a magazine or in some kind of, you know, animation presentation. Okay. Early on. It may have even been an early Pixar demonstration that was using Lightwave, and then I saw somebody's work that they were doing in Lightwave, and you know, at that point I was still in the stage of associating the quality of someone's work with the tools that they used. And so Lightwave was suddenly this, oh my gosh, if only I had Lightwave, I could do incredible things, and it would be great. Then that dream diminished quickly.
Oh my word! So I'm curious, Jonathan Williamson, I admire you for being one of the most like objective minds I think I've ever come across. So like, did you ever venture into kind of fanboy, like Blender being this awesome free tool that does like what you thought Lightwave could only do? Did you like in your excitement freak out and venture over that direction?
I don't have any memory of doing that, but I've got to assume that I did. You know, it's still in many ways, still I am completely obsessed. You know, everything that I've managed to do in my professional career has been because of what Blender opened up to me. You know, not necessarily for Blender specifically, but that was the catalyst in just about everything. Right. So I have to assume that I did. I don't have any memory of doing it though.
I think does everyone kind of go through that journey where they start out on the utilitarian side, and they're just like, wow, this is a free software. Look what it can do, and you become like a preacher for like a fanboy, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think everyone goes through that journey, and then they realize when they're talking to a brick wall, like everyone's like, what are you talking about? Like, get away from me, you weirdo. Then you kind of turn around and you look at yourself and you go, oh, why am I trying to tell everyone to use Blender? Because it's awesome. I think it's awesome. I think people change, like, you know what I mean? Like, and then when they realize that, they're like, oh, cool, it's just a tool, and I should just be using whatever tool that I feel comfortable with and whatever gets the job done. So I think in my journey, I've gone from both of you have already spoken about, from the utilitarian side over to the fanboy side, and now preferential is kind of maybe it's not the exact terminology that fits where I sit right now, but I think I'm very comfortable with Blender, and I know that there's other stuff out there that does the job, but you know, like there's many different tools that you can use, and that's exactly how I see it now. So I've gone through it like from one end of the spectrum, like and then I've come to the middle, like I think is the best way to describe where I'm sitting at the moment.
Yeah, it's funny. I started it as a timeline when I first started putting that together, and then I was like, but I know experienced artists who are always utilitarian. They're going to whatever works best at this point in time, and they're extremely objective with their software choices.
I think
almost like it's a cycle where at one point you're like, oh, this is the best, and then you like hit the limitations, and you're like, oh, well, I bet the other software could do that really well, and then you jump over there, but it's like, well, but then that doesn't have like the right selection thing, and I don't know.
No, you're right. That's a good point.
These particles work. These particles don't.
Exactly.
I would assume that some of it too, and I know this definitely applied to me, is enthusiasm based, in that, like, you know, when you're kind of getting over that initial hump, your enthusiasm for the software that you're using goes way up, because suddenly you're able to do things with it. And you know, most people, when they get enthusiastic about something, really like to share that enthusiasm with other people, even if the other people have no understanding of why you're so enthusiastic about the thing that you're doing or the tool that you're using. And I think that can come across really quickly as fanboyism, even if it's not. I mean, obviously sometimes it is, but it's just that people like to share the things they're super excited about. And sometimes that thing that you're excited about is the software, and everybody else is just kind of, dude, it's just software.
I think there are some softwares that don't really have, well, every software has fanboys, but they don't have the vocal fanboys that are like actively trying to go out and tell people, oh, you should, what are you doing? What are you using Maya? Like, why aren't you using Maya? You should use Maya. Like, what are you using like 3ds for? Like, you're crazy. Like, I've never heard anyone like talk about Maya like that, you know, but Blender, you see it everywhere on forums, like, oh, you should use Blender. You should, like, no.
So you're getting on to a topic. I want to save that. I think that's a big one, because I think Blender is unique in that. But I wanted to hear, Lampell, what was your like software journey like? Did you experience that kind of utilitarian preferential thing?
Sort of, not really. I started out with Blender 2.49, I think.
Oh, wow.
And then I didn't like it at all. So then I found like the student version of 3ds Max, and I did that. Then I came back to Blender, and then I did Maya in school, and then I switched back to Blender.
Nice.
So
what do you think kept you coming back to Blender?
I think I was most familiar with it, and it was really easy to get help on the forums and whatnot.
Right.
So everybody was like open and sharing and everything.
Right.
But searching like 3ds Max tutorials, there's not quite, there is probably more now than there was back then, but there just wasn't that much help.
Right. Yeah. No, I guess that does make sense. I'm still astounded to this day that Blender never popped up on my radar when I was desperately searching the internet for 3D stuff.
When was this, Kent? What year was that you were searching?
That would have been 2003 and 4.
Yeah, I found the same thing. Like when because I started I didn't want to be a 3D artist or whatever. I was just tinkering around with my computer. I'm like, what can I do with my computer? Like, computers are fun. And then I found Animate. Do you guys remember that software at all? Like, I had a few tutorials, but it was basically, I don't think it was open source, but it was free software. But one guy was the developer, so the development was obviously really slow.
Right.
But it's Animate with the 8.
Oh, with the 8, I remember.
The 8.
Yeah.
Okay, that clicks for me.
That was the first thing that I found, and I was like, oh wow, this is free thing. And there was quite a lot of tutorials about it, and I went through all of them, and I was trying to figure them out. And I'm like, oh hey, I made something move, and it was like, yeah, great, I've done it. And then I tried to learn a little bit more about it, and I hit the limit of what was available at the time. Like there was no, because it was only one guy doing the development, and maybe still around, I'm not sure, but I kind of, everything stopped. And so I couldn't do anymore. And then when I went back to, actually then a friend of mine was telling me, you've got to use Maya. Like he was at school for 3D at the time. And he's like, everyone uses it's the industry standard. You got to use Maya. Mm-hmm. And he gave me a cracked version of it. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. This is great. So I started learning that. I got a book from a library, and I was like trying to teach myself how to use Maya. And then the next version came out, and I was like, well, how am I going to get the next version? This is like impossible. Well, I'm going to get an illegal copy every couple of months or every 6 months whenever whenever the new software comes out. Like this is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And then I searched again, and I found a whole bunch of stuff on Blender, and I was like, what is this? And that's how I found Blender when I went back to look for an alternative to Animate, and I found Blender, and I was like, how did I miss this?
Right.
Like, because there's a huge amount of stuff available for it.
Absolutely. I wish I could go back then and see where Blender was at that time, and how that somehow missed it.
You can still download all of them, and most of them.
I don't think I mean literally go back to the software. So, okay, the next topic that we were starting to get into that actually Ronald in the chat mentioned, he says, software package in quotes, isn't Blender a way of life? And I think that's a huge thing to Blender, is because it's like motivated partially by this movement, this ideology of open source, and it's so accessible that it's a lot easier to become a fanboy of Blender and the community at large, compared to like a Maya or a 3ds Max or any other commercial package. So I'm curious what you guys think about like fanboyism. I don't think anyone's typically proud to be a fanboy, but I can admit to like aspects of my own current opinion or inclination that it is a fanboy. What do you guys think about? What do you think it does to yourself as an artist, but also to like Blender as a thing?
Well, I think being a fanboy, ultimately it limits your ability as an artist, because you are so closed-minded to any of the other options that are out there. So if I could relive my time again, when I was in that fanboy stage, I would just tap myself on the shoulder and I'll go, come on, man, like don't be such a fanboy. And I'd be like, what's a fanboy? Because I wouldn't realize it at the time. But I think you've got to be open to other solutions, because at the end of the day, you just want to get the result done in the quickest way possible. But yeah, I understand the whole movement behind and why it's so easy to become a fanboy in Blender, and it is because of that community and the open source. It wouldn't work if there wasn't that community behind it. But the downside of that community is you get kind of swept away in like the mob mentality, for lack of a better term, of like, yeah, let's go get your pitchforks and like attack anyone else who's like using a different software. And it's like, well, hang on, no, we're all just in this 3D world together, people. Like, can't we all just get along?
Yeah, that's a good perspective.
I think I would agree completely with that. And also it's the way that you approach, not the way that you typically intentionally approach fanboyism, but most people that become fanatic fanboys, intentionally or otherwise, tend to do it out of enthusiasm, and it's not focused on the artwork, it's not focused on the production, it's not focused on what the person is actually doing. It's almost got like a religious tendency to it, in the sense of you should believe this, you should do this, and that has nothing to do with what you're actually creating. And so if you're suddenly just pushing Blender down everybody's throats because you think you want to spread Blender, what are you actually achieving?
You bring up a good point. It's kind of counterintuitive. It does the exact opposite of what you're trying to do.
Oh, yeah. And I think that there's a real reason that people tend to get almost fanatical about about Blender, and it's because it's so accessible. You know, Blender is one of the few exceptions where you can become as involved as you want to be. And, you know, so long as you don't burn a lot of bridges in that process, you can, you know, you can work on Blender code for a living. You can create assets in Blender for a living. You can animate in Blender for a living. You can do Blender designs for a living. You can teach Blender for a living. Like, you can't really say the same about hardly any other 3D software unless you happen to get a job at the production company that happens to develop said software. Whereas in Blender, it doesn't matter where in the world you are. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. You can do that. And that produces an awful lot of enthusiasm for all of the things that, you know, get us excited about doing work in Blender.
Yeah.
But it's not always a healthy relationship that's created.
Yeah, that's very true.
I think that was a good point about it not really being about the end result, if that's the case. Like, I've definitely found myself being less that way the more that I, you know, started working on jobs and doing my own freelance projects whenever, when I started out. Then that's when I sort of hit the very practical side of things, when you actually have to put your money on the line. Whereas just playing around with it as a hobbyist, it's very easy to be enthusiastic.
Yeah.
It really is.
If you're doing a job for someone, they do not care what software that you use, and they're not going to give you a high five if they're like, "Oh wow, you use Blender, high five!" Like, they're just like, "Give me the pixels, man! Like, all I want is the pixels."
Yes.
Just give it to me in a file that I can use, and I'll write you a check.
Right.
That's it. Yeah.
So Wayne, I wanted to ask you, since you do a lot of freelance, have you ever run into jobs where when you tell them I use Blender, are you very strict about that, and they don't give you the job therefore, or are both of you can kind of move
Of
on?
all the animation jobs that I've had, it's always been Blender based. Like, there's been, like, if they don't care, there's different types of jobs. There's ones where you're part of a team and you're working with other people remotely, and then you have to use the same software that they use, because it's all, you know, you're sending files back and forth and you've got to be working like that.
Right.
So in those situations, it has to be a Blender project, because it just won't work otherwise. It's like, oh, can you do this part of the thing and then convert it over to this file and spend half a day making sure that all the textures map, so then I can do my bit and then I'll do the same. It just doesn't work like that. So if you're doing the whole project yourself, like where you're creating the character, all they want is the pixels at the end. They just want the animation file. It doesn't matter what software that you use. And I've hired people to do modeling for me and the texturing for me and stuff like that. And I don't say, oh, you must model in Blender. You must in Blender. I just say, I just need the file. You use whatever you want. Right. Just give me the file in the version that I could use, just like what Jonathan said there. So it's like, it doesn't matter what you use. You're the artist that I'm hiring. You do the job for me, but give me what I require, which is the file, and then I'll take it from there. So if you're doing the whole job yourself, I work my bit in Blender, but I can hire people out as long as it's compatible. Then it doesn't matter what they use. But if you're working on a team, so you're one person who's being hired out for that, you have to use the same software. So in those situations, like 99.9% of the time I'm using Blender, but then there's been a few occasions where I've used Maya, which is my second most proficient software. But I only know how to do animation in that software, because it was like that's all I wanted to do. Because and then Blender I know how to do a lot more.
Right.
Things.
So when you say a file, because I think that in terms of modeling, like it's easy to pop out an OBJ or something, and
modeling is easy,
right. Like, but with animation, do you deliver an animation, like a sequence of a model sequence? I forget what they called.
Image sequence, yeah. So it depends on what the client wants. If they probably don't want all the assets, like they don't want the blend files and the thing. They just want the video at the end of it. So you're just using a video. So you've got all the assets on your end, like all the blend files and all the textures and stuff like that. And then you're just sending them updates of how the video is going. And then at the end, they get the video in whatever format that they want. Like, oh, great, this is what I want. They don't want to be hanging on to like all these blend.1 files.
Sure.
It's just the movie file.
Right. Okay. So you even, when I was compartmentalizing it even further, that people come to you, give me the animation, and then you pass off the animation to someone else to render and light it.
Yeah. So that's in those situations. So when I'm working on a team, like I've done a couple of projects where I'm just like an animator in the thing. So you're logging in via FTP, and you just get your file in a little folder, and you work on it. And then when the animation's finished, it's on the remote folder, like Dropbox or FTP file servers or whatever. So they always have the files at their end, and then they get someone else to render them or do whatever.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I think
yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Totally. Jay. So real quick, I'm still getting, by the way, the upgrade message in the upper left. When I click on it, it says you're currently on a paid plan.
Oh. Okay. Hold on. I will look at that.
Okay.
Might have to restart Zoom without changing anything.
Oh, okay. That's fine. We can do that if we need to. The next question that I wanted to ask you guys, or maybe ask your opinion about, is the tension sometimes that I can feel between something that obviously could do something better, but me telling myself, well, I'm going to figure out how to do it in Blender. Does anyone relate to that? And does that count as fanboyism or resourcefulness?
I think I know exactly what you mean. So just to be more precise, to clarify that, you're talking about if you see something done in another software, you're like, oh, that'd be kind of cool if I could do it in Blender. That's right. what you mean.
Exactly.
So you're trying to figure out a way around or a workaround in that inside Blender. And I do that all the time because I'm like looking at rigging things, and you're like, how does it work in Maya, or how do they solve these problems? And then you try and translate that into Blender, and sometimes it works better, sometimes you can't do it, like it's totally impossible, and sometimes it works, but it's like a much more convoluted way. So I think it is like on the fine line between like being resourceful and being like, oh, come on, man, like you should just be using the right tools for the job.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it does, depending on like why you're doing it. Like I find it's because we're comfortable with Blender, like, and you want to be able to learn and get the skills to be able to do it in the one software, because it slows you down to work for like 3 hours on this in this one software. Then you've got to export it out to Mudbox or whatever you're doing it, do your little tinkering away in there, and then convert it back and continue working from where you're going. So you're losing a lot of time in that. So if you can do it all in the one software, you can just get into the flow and just keep working. Like it's not going to slow you down.
Right.
And maybe initially it's going to take you a long time to figure out how to do that, how to do the process of that. Like, do I do this and then this and then this? And then it works.
Right.
But you might be able to find a way of like making those steps shorter, if you know what I mean. So if you're doing the same thing over and over in the software, you can just write a tool or like a Python script that'll do something for you. So
yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Eventually, like of the time that you spend learning how to do it, it could pay dividends in the end when you're like, okay, now I don't have to slow down in Blender, and I've sped up my workflow, and I don't have to purchase another piece of software or do whatever. Does that make sense? What I'm trying?
Yeah, it absolutely does. One thing that I think applies to that is sculpting, for example. I think that ZBrush is without a doubt a better, more full-featured sculpting package. But I will use Blender and maximize its capabilities because I can render like the actual sculpt information from Blender through multi-res in the actual render engine. I don't have to do a low-res bake displacements and risk possible discrepancies in that transition process. I think that's an example of choosing Blender, even though it's not a better sculpting software than ZBrush. I'll use it for that reason. But one of the maybe lesser examples, and I'm curious what you think, Lampel, is Substance Painter, Substance Designer. Unbelievable software. I'm amazed by it. Every time like I go on ArtStation and something new is procedural, and I'm like, there's no way that's procedural. It's absurd. But like what that makes me want to do is not get Substance, but figure out how to do something similar in Blender. And you're a Substance user, so what do you think about that? Is that my fanboyism kind of creeping in?
Not like, I think like Wayne said, if you can figure out a way to do it in one software, that definitely saves time overall. So that's pretty practical. Like
It's
first.
definitely not saving me time, man.
I think that's practical.
Yeah.
But I think in the case of Substance, it's so much better that it's just there's not really any alternative.
Right.
Whereas ZBrush, like you can still get the same shapes in Blender. Like if you can sculpt, you can sculpt in either program.
True.
One just might be a little bit more good for like specific shapes and brushes and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with Substance, you can't really do that in Blender.
Yeah.
So that's one where it's easy enough to export, easy enough to import back.
Mm-hmm.
It all just kind of works together.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, I don't know that, like, even though it might be a little bit of, hard-headedness to say, oh, well, forget Substance, I'll figure out how to do it in Blender.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it's also just embracing your limits and saying, hey, I really don't want to pay for this other software. I know this one really well, so let's figure out how to do it. And if we can get something that's adequate and solves the same problem, that's not fanboys, and that's just resourcefulness.
Okay.
Yeah,
totally.
I appreciate you guys are kind about that. That was supposed to be like a bit of an admission. Does anyone else have an admission that they choose Blender because even though it's less than another software in your objective mind?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So like I do a decent amount of 3D printing work, both just for fun and for the occasional client. And there are plenty of projects where something should absolutely just be done in CAD because it's just a CAD project. And Blender doesn't really do real world scale very well, particularly when you're down to, a millimeter or less.
Wow.
And so I just do it in Blender anyway.
Is that
because I don't feel like taking the time to learn SolidWorks or anything like that.
Right. Oh, absolutely. No, I feel that too. Like, and it's that like preference. Once you've done something for so long in another software, it's hard. I'm like a geezer. I feel like I don't want to take the time to learn in another one. I'll make it harder
Well, it depends
on myself.
on how big that hurdle is to get over. Like for Jonathan Lampel, he mentioned like the software is so much better. So the hurdle of trying to do it in Blender, it can't be jumped because you're not going to be able to reach that limit. So he's made a conscious decision. He's just like, well, I'm just going to use the best tool for the job. But when I think if you're like, it's about doing if you're going to invest the time and it pays off at the end, then it's worth it. But if it's going to take you like 6 months to learn SolidWorks to be able to do this one project, it's like it's not worth it. Like you just do it in Blender, deal with all the issues. Maybe you scale it 1,000 times bigger, do your project, and then scale it down back to the actual size. Is that how you solve that problem, Jonathan?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like, granted, most of the 3D printing work that I do, like, even though and such work, nothing has to be within like 1,000th of an inch in accuracy. Like, so it's not highly precise printing work. It's precise enough that, where most things are measured in 1/10 of a millimeter or so, but that's totally doable in Blender. It's one of those things that if I knew the other tools, it would be much easier to do in those than it would be in Blender. But for the scope of the projects, typically it's faster for me to do it in the tool that I know than to do it in the ideal tool for the job. Because otherwise I've got to learn a new one. And, some of that is just being hard-headed and just saying, no, I want to use Blender, so I'm going to find a way to do it. Some of it is, well, this project isn't long enough to warrant learning a new tool.
Oh, for sure. Do you think part of it also you specifically, since you know more of the coding and scripting and all that stuff, do you think part of it is just like finding your own pain points? Like, hey, maybe we can actually solve this. Where in CAD, you have zero power to actually improve those things later?
I think that's a big part of it. Give me 1 second, then I'll answer. Kent, you may have to restart the meeting. I don't know if the upgrade actually applied.
Okay.
May have to restart it. So if we cut out in a moment, we'll be right back. So don't leave.
I'll still be here on audio, so I'll talk him through the issue.
So Jonathan Lampel, I think the part of it for me is, since so much of the work that I do now overlaps with tool development on the Blender market and on CG Cookie and on the Blender side, I do really like that aspect of say hey, if we've got a pain point here, maybe we can solve it. And who knows, maybe that will then roll over into something else. If I were strictly doing it as a production artist, I don't know that I would feel the same way, but
Yeah, totally.
It's interesting that you point out these pain points, And maybe we could move the conversation to like this fan. I think one of the downsides of the fanboy or the community aspect of Blender is the whole everything should be free mentality. So if someone finds a pain point and they create an add-on or something that solves that problem, and then
ooh, and there he goes. All right, guys. So if you missed what the issue was, I don't know what the problem is. We're using the software called Zoom, and even though we are paying for it, it told me we weren't. So I'm going to start a new meeting real quick and just get those guys back in here. So bear with me. And I am also keeping an eye on your chat. I know that you guys are asking some questions, so I'm going to go through there and we're going to start answering those. We're not trying to leave you out to dry or anything, but yeah, let me paste this link to the other guys and we'll get the conversation back up and running. Let's see. All right. So they should start filing in here pretty soon. Oh, there he is. He's revealed his true name, 6R69Y5.
Yes.
Oh, and we'll switch the order just to
okay.
keep you. All right, so I think we're back.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, you changed my name again. Thank you, Kent.
Don't want your secret out too much. Name. So before we go into that topic, because it's huge and I would love to talk about that, Wayne, I was scrolling through the chat and we do have a few questions, actually a lot of conversation going on and opinions being thrown about, which is great. But the first one that I remember getting to is from Daniel, and he's asking, do you ever forget how to do stuff in Blender after a bit of time not using it? Anybody have an answer for that? I do, if you don't.
Well, the answer is yes, all the time. I forget stuff. So I'm often watching tutorials again, just for that little snippet. You're like, oh, how do I just want to remember how to do that? Or I'm Googling the little bit that I know. But because I've more experience, you kind of know what term you're actually Googling for. So I think as you get more experience, you're like, oh, what is that name for that thing that I've forgotten? You actually know the name for it. So it helps it out, makes it a little bit easier. But yes, all the time, I forget how to do things, and I'm watching the same tutorial again. You're like, oh, that's it. Yeah.
For my half, let me just say this. I have watched my own tutorials to relearn how to do something that I previously taught more times than I have probably done the actual tutorial.
That's so true.
Okay.
So true. That's always weird.
Have you ever watched your own tutorials and you're like, wow, I used to know a lot of stuff. Like, this guy
not anymore. What happened to me?
I think my intelligence has gone like down over time. You know what I mean? Like, listen to this guy. He's
just become more focused.
Yeah. I mean, Blend. If you think about it, 3D is such a huge thing. Like I think of every time I get a question about the Piero course, I shrug because back then I spent like 3 solid months focused on all that stuff, rigging. It's like I need to know how to do this stuff. I recorded it and then out it goes. I don't remember any of it anymore. And I think that's true for a lot of the 3D. It's just so expansive that like right now I've been working a lot on this lava procedural. I know everything about this spaghetti network of nodes, but in a week I'll be clicking around like I've never seen it before. And so I got to record that tutorial while it's fresh and I don't.
And a lot of it just comes down to like the areas that you're most familiar with. I mean, like I'll admit, like the area that I don't forget how to do things in is modeling. Like modeling just comes back second nature. Yeah. You know, I modeled something for the first time in probably 4 months. Just this last weekend, and it was just totally normal. Now, if I go in and try and use particles right now, I'm just stumbling around in the dark. I'm just like, I knew these things at one point.
Right. Gosh, that's so true. Another question from Malhomesy: does your workflow affect your software choice? We were talking a little bit about that, but I'm curious.
We have, yeah. I think. I think it should. Like we've spoken a little bit about it, where you're trying to use the right tool for the job. And yesterday, Kent and we were on a chat for a different topic, but we also mentioned this, where he finds that if he sees someone like create something and they're like, oh, I started it in Blender and then I went away and I did some sculpting in something else and then I came back to Blender, he feels a little bit of a twinge inside where he's like, you should have just used Blender for the whole thing and like the whole project. And I was like, well, it depends on what. Like I used to be like that when I see people like using software that wouldn't be my choice. I'm like, why are you doing that? Don't you know Blender can do that?
Yep.
I just try and catch myself there and I go, well, I don't own somebody else's workflow. So if they are really proficient and they're really fast and it really works for them, let them do that. And don't badger them about it and don't be like, oh, I can't believe you didn't do this. Like it's what works for them. So let them do that. You do what you do. Like using it all in Blender, let them use whatever software that they use. So to answer your question, I've forgotten what the name was. Like, yeah, so it does. Your workflow does depend on what software that you want to use, and vice versa. So it can go back and forth. So yeah, hopefully, that makes sense.
From a much wiser man than me. That's very true.
No, not at all.
Discredit yourself, Kent.
Let's see if I missed any other questions. A lot of people throwing good opinions out here. I hope you guys have been reading through that. But I'm looking for questions specifically. Okay. I'll start all there. So Ronald is asking, why start all over again in another package while you can expand your current skill set in the software you already know? I think that's probably true in a package sense. And when I say package, if that's not familiar to anybody watching, like 3D Studio Max is a package, Maya is a package, Blender is a package. I'm not sure if Modo is a package. It might be close now, but for a long time
it's becoming one.
It's becoming one.
Modo started out as a modeling tool almost exclusively, but now it's much more than just modeling.
Right. And so these are like, they try to do everything, but they're like a central hub of a software that can kind of be the base of a pipeline, whereas ZBrush, you can't do a whole movie in ZBrush and then all the ZBrush people go off now and be like, no, you can, I'm going to show you.
I would rephrase the question a little bit, because it really, you're not starting over. If you're only a couple weeks in and then you switch, yeah, you're starting over. But let's say you've been using Blender for a couple of years and you know a thing or two about modeling and animation, you know how to light and render, and you've got a strong grasp of the fundamentals. To then switch to Maya or Max, you're really not starting over. You're only starting over about 90% of the way in, because at that point, you know all the processes. You just have to relearn how to apply those processes to the tool. Because modeling in every package, with basically the exception of ZBrush, is fundamentally the same. Lighting in every package is fundamentally the same. Rendering is fundamentally the same. They all use the same basic techniques. Many of them use the same algorithms for everything. It's just, it's a different style of hammer. That's all it is for the most part.
Yeah.
So you're not really starting over.
Yeah, my main problem when I switched to Maya for animation tools was mostly just, how do I scale these darn keyframe handles? Like that was that was the biggest thing. But all of the actual animation stuff was the same.
Yeah, it's all the same. Yeah, there's a lot of different software quirks where I don't like in Maya, where you have to have the manipulator active. So you can't you can't have a multi-manipulator. Like each software has their own little quirks. You just get used to it in whatever you prefer.
Yeah. A couple more questions from Nathan Foster. What was the hardest part of Blender to learn for each of us? I'm actually really interested what you guys would say to that.
Well, who wants to start?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to think about that.
Well, maybe, to me, that almost seems like more of what was the hardest process to learn? Because if I had to do it, it would be compositing. I don't know a darn thing about color. I can work with nodes all day long. I understand nodes. I understand kind of what's sort of happening, but I don't know a damn thing about how to actually make the color work. And so I don't know a thing about compositing, because everything I do in compositing is wrong.
Yeah. I've seen your compositions. That's not true. But
no. The composition's okay. Composition is easy relative to color.
I would say for me, some of the most frustrating things for me to learn are like simulation stuff or particles, because to me, I know what I want to get, but the only way to get there is plugging numbers, clicking the button, and waiting. That didn't work. Testing over and over again different values. I'm not sure. I feel like I learned too much, except memorizing what values to try next time, to start from next time. But I find that stuff particularly hard to do. But Lampel, you might not agree with me. You do that stuff pretty well.
Yeah, I find that a bit easier, just in the same idea where once you find the right values, you can kind of know where to start from. So it doesn't really take skill. It just takes like persistence.
Yes.
So I feel like I spent a lot of time learning that, and I didn't get a lot of like value. Like if I'd spent all of that time sculpting, I would probably have learned way more. Where now I still find sculpting kind of difficult in terms of like I'm not 100% sure about all the anatomy and all that stuff. But now I know a bunch of useless numbers that I can plug in that'll probably change in a year. So it all depends.
Let's see. Okay.
Yeah. So
oh yeah, Wayne. What
the
were you going to
hardest thing for me to learn, I think I tried to learn too much at the start of Blender. So like the first thing that confused me, and it only confused me for about 3 minutes, was like the right click select. I was trying to select things and it wouldn't work. And then I figured out, it's right click, and it made total sense. And now I see, like years later, why that's genius. And it's genius, people. It's genius. If you animate, it's genius, right? But I just tried to learn too much, so everything was confusing, and it took me a while just to kind of settle down and go, right, I'm just going to focus on one thing. So I sat down for a couple of weeks, and I'm like, how I'm going to get better at modeling? How does this all work? And then I've moved on to different areas. So I think, yeah, just stick with one thing when you start, and you're going to be better off. You're going to have a better start to things.
So are you a right-click select person?
I totally am.
Man, we are divided right across the screen. That's so funny.
I am not.
Are you right-click select?
You hate. See, if you animate, you can see because you're left-clicking, selecting certain things, and you're right-click selecting certain things. And to separate them out means that they can be on top of each other, and you can still select what you want to select. And this does not break your flow, because you are selecting the right thing, the right time, right when you want to select it. When you use Maya, I spoke about the manipulators need to be active, and if you're selecting inside the manipulator and you wanted to click another control, you can't do it. So what you have to do is you have to push another button to clear the manipulator, and then you have to select what you want, and then you have to push the button to get the right manipulator up. And so it's like 3 or 4 buttons just to do one simple action, which could have been one click in Blender. And so it's all about workflow for me. So that right click select means I can just click with my right select, and it's going to work every time. It's not going to slow me down that like half a second every 5 seconds. So at the end of a minute, I've lost how much time? At the end of the day, I've lost how much time? At the end of my life, oh my God.
Good night. Wow.
I'm in a slightly different camp in that I love right-click select, but I think it's fundamentally broken for people to be introduced to right-click select upon opening Blender. I think it should be an option. But I love it because for exactly what you just said, Wayne, it is a power user's dream tool that you don't realize they need.
That's amazing.
And that's the case.
So good.
Like, if I didn't learn Blender that way, like I would not know the power that it wields. Yeah. You know, if I came in and it wasn't an option, like if left click was the option, I wouldn't know how good it was now. And I guess I'm being a little bit like right click select fanboy.
You're utilitarian to me. I think.
So wait, Lampel, where do you stand?
Oh, I'm definitely right click.
Yes. High five. Yeah. So we're leaning more towards the right, the alt right.
Man,
You can also like switch between, especially like when you're weight painting bones and all that stuff. You can quickly switch between bones and still paint directly on them.
Oh my gosh, man, that was like the first.
Comes down to workflow.
Dang, I feel like I'm missing out. I've switched that day one of getting used to Blender and never looked back.
Yeah, and see now, like you've gone and you spent like 27,000 years using, like you cannot change now. Like it's going to take you, like the hurdle for you to get over that is so big that I don't know whether it's worth the reward, because you've got to change all those connections in your brain of like, this is the thing, how I do that. Like, it happens automatically for you. So you set yourself up for a challenge.
You know, I was honestly a little ashamed of that. And, you know, it's hard. It's pretty obvious to anyone who watches my tutorials that like I use left click select, and that really screwed me for teaching that way. But and then Bassam tweeted that he's a left click select person, and now I proudly own that fact. But
you can own it. It's like no one, like if you're left-handed, like no one goes, oh my God, I can't believe you're left-handed. Like, what are you, crazy? Like you should be right-handed. You should be right-handed, man.
Good point.
Oh wait, you're not left. Are you left-handed, Ken?
I'm not. I'm right-handed. Any lefties?
Nope.
Okay.
No lefties here.
Well, at least we're all good in that way. Just kidding.
Let's get 'em.
So a random question from Michael. He asked Jonathan Williamson about ReTopoFlow 2. If there's any news that you could drop.
Kind of. So, I mean, as most projects go, we are several months behind where we hoped to be. In short, basically, we have been updating Jonathan Denning has been updating all of the OpenGL drawing to basically future-proof it for some of the changes coming in 2.8 and possibly before then to make it more universal and draw better. And in that process, lots of things broke on different systems. And so we are going through and repairing all of those. There is no release date other than it is still pending soon.
Oh, no, I see that you answered that in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's just a big project, and we would have liked to have released it in alpha and beta 3 months ago. And so I'm hesitant to give any kind of release date.
Maybe we should do. I'm seeing Lucas Falcao, maybe. Excellent character artist. He's asking about right click, and for him to be such an experienced artist and ask questions about it, maybe we should do something about left click versus right click, and I don't know, a blog post or a little video or something. But
yeah.
Okay, I think we have. Okay, I think we've reached the end of the questions for the last 10 minutes or so. Please feel free to continue asking questions, but I wanted to get back on the topic, Wayne, that you started to hit on, and that idea of Blender as a free thing and kind of incorporating everything should be free with that movement. What did you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think the way people are so enthusiastic and the way they come into the community where, oh wow, this software is free, it's a software, this is amazing, everything should be free in the community, giving their time and their energies and all that. I think maybe not so much with the CG Cookie community because that is a paid service for like the premium content. Maybe it's not so like those people are of the mindset that not everything can be free, and you've got to give back to the community somehow, whether that is like helping other people with their technical issues, whether it's actually your expertise yourself. So maybe you're a coder, as Jonathan mentioned before, or maybe you're giving files, or you're like, you got to help out somewhere. But I think I'd like to see, it's come up heaps before, but I'd like to see a shift in the mindset of the people who want to tear down anything as soon as like if there's a money value attached to anything, be it like an add-on to fix a pain point, or whether it's like, oh, watch my course, or yeah, I think I'd like to get rid of that mentality. And I think it kind of leans towards the fanboy end of the spectrum, where like I mentioned it before, alt-right, they're really alt fanboy, like it's free, it's open source, like what are you doing? You're trying to like you can't eat dreams, people. You need money to buy food, to eat food.
You can't eat dreams. Quote of the stream. That's great.
Well, you can't. I can.
Oh, can you?
That's so true.
You know, that's a really good point. That like, I've noticed that people tend to, for better or for worse, stop fighting the everything, or stop promoting the everything has to be absolutely free the moment they start working professionally.
Yes.
And I think that there's a reason for that, and just that you discover the value of time.
Yeah.
And you know what? Saving a few hours here and there is worth paying for, if in turn it enables you to do your work better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And Wayne, like you've said many times, and it's inspired me to that point of like, you're paying it forward, and the time that you've been involved on your courses, answering comments and grading exercises is more attention to your courses than I think ever put toward my own courses. It's made me be more involved, be there to answer questions, spend more time doing that. And I mean, I feel like it's super valuable, and seeing what that's done to the animation part of our community on CG Cookie, that's been huge. And in that way, yeah, I mean, you're a shining example of giving and
thanks, man. Yeah, I'm trying to pay it forward, and I think that's what we should do for the whole community. Like, let's divorce the concept of money. Like, so the people who are doing the animation courses on CG Cookie, they've paid, like they're the paid members. But what I'm doing to pay it forward is I'm giving them the feedback, because that's the most important thing. So I'm giving my expertise on their feedback to lift them up to the level. Now, you guys don't pay me for that, and I don't ask you guys to pay me for that. But what I do want to happen is for that idea to spread further. So it's later down the road, when those people have skills, they're going to help someone else out. Or, it doesn't matter. You don't need to be skilled in animation. You could be skilled in coding, or you could just be a generally nice person. Like, you just got to help someone out in the future. So it shouldn't be attached to like the money side of things. But having said that, the reason that I'm only doing it for the paid students is because my time, as Jonathan mentioned, is valuable. Yeah. Like, so I spend like about an hour of my day, of my work day, grading these lessons gratis. So it's but I can't spend 8 hours of my day doing that, because, as I've mentioned before, you can't eat dreams, people. Like, I wish you could, but you can't eat dreams.
I've never heard that before. That is gold.
It's probably safe to assume that, like, when people really push back against basically push back against paying for anything, and that, the whole mentality of, if it's around Blender, it should be free, is probably around just based in that fear that everything suddenly will have a pay gate. If you want to ask a question, it'll have a pay gate. If you want to download the software, it'll have a pay gate. If you want to enable this feature, it'll have a pay gate. And it is a reasonable concern, but in reality, that's just typically not the case. For one, companies and people and teams that do that kind of restrictions, like to that degree, don't tend to get very good feedback, and they don't tend to survive unless you're already a big enough conglomerate that you can just do whatever you want. And
right.
Nobody has any power to do that. That's typically not the case.
It is interesting, though, that like if there's other softwares release paid add-ons and such, where I don't think there's that backlash of people going, "Oh, you should be free. Like, you're greedy. What are you doing?" Like if Maya, like there was the blue pencil, which is basically a grease pencil for Maya, and that came out a few years ago. It was a paid thing, and no one had qualms with paying money for that add-on. And I think it is because that's paid software. People are just in the mindset like, "Oh, I'm paying for things." But when the free thing comes in, like, imagine if you tried to charge for grease pencil now, like, people are like, they would burn you alive.
Well, the precedent is already set.
Yes, that's right.
When you release a tool from day one as a paid tool, and then you continue to release updates for that either free, you've already set expectations from day one. If everything starts out free and then you slowly introduce payment, that's a little bit more challenging.
Changes, totally.
Man, it's like every useful thing in 3ds Max is also a paid add-on. Want to do cool destruction effects, or breaking stuff, or modeling, unwrapping.
So Jonathan Williamson, I'm wondering, I don't want to put you on the spot and make you uncomfortable, but like, you've spent probably the most amount of time around Ton, and also in like businessy talks, with him. So like, what is his, could you speak at all, like in general terms, like what his perspective is on like paid add-ons or the Blender market, as like these kind of things around Blender?
I want to be very careful not to put words in his mouth or misalign anything, but I think it's safe to say that that he's effectively all for it. And he's been a very big supporter of the Blender market from day one. even highlighting it in several Blender conference keynotes in a row, highlighting it at SIGGRAPH, and certainly I'm sure that a part of that is the amount that the Blender market contributes back to the development fund every single month. But just as an initiative, TON is really focused on making sure that Blender is a free tool for everyone and a tool for success for everyone. And one of the ways that you make Blender a successful tool for people, or you help people find success through Blender, is making sure that they can pay their bills. And if one of the ways to pay somebody's bills is through creating further tools for Blender or creating assets that people can use within their own projects through Blender, then that furthers that initiative. TON's big focus is, and it's right there on blender.org, is that Blender is for everyone and that it will always be free. It is always there, and that it is a complete package. And so, a lot of people have concerns with, say, like the Blender Market or paid add-ons on saying that, well, suddenly, the better extrude tool will be paid, or the grease pencil will be paid, and that suddenly Blender will be a piecemeal application. But that goes completely contrary to everything that TON and the Blender Foundation have fought for all of these years, of making sure that, hey, regardless of the add-ons that are available, Blender is intended to be a complete tool that is freely available for any use for anyone, no matter where you are in the world, no matter who you are. And it doesn't really matter what the add-ons are at that point. The add-ons are just a secondary layer.
Yeah.
If a tool is vital and fundamental to Blender success and for people to succeed in Blender, that tool will be added. And because it's all GPL, if somebody creates that tool, sells it as an add-on, and then it's absolutely essential that become integrated in Blender, it will be.
Whoa. That'll be crazy.
That's just part of, being an open source application, that you can do that.
That's probably what will happen with things like animation nodes and bPainter and whatnot. Eventually,
absolutely,
it'll find its way in.
I don't, I don't want to, accidentally, toot our own horn or anything, but like, for example, Polypen and RotopoFlow is already starting to be integrated slowly into Blender 2.8. There's a new tool basically that's effectively PolyDraw. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's the same basic kind of functionality that enables you to draw quads really, really quickly with very few clicks. That's coming into 2.8. And that kind of overlap is really, really good. But that kind of development probably wouldn't have ever happened without some commercial intentions behind it, because it took a lot of work.
Oh my goodness. All right, so we're about to the time limit. I wanted to ask, or there's two more questions. One from Omar that's on that topic. Would other companies try to stop Blender from being free? Is that like a thing? Is that a possibility?
I mean, can't.
Yeah.
Well, they can try, but because of the license, there's not anything legally that they can do about it.
I didn't think there was, because
no, I don't think so. If you're a company like Autodesk, you might start being worried about Blender taking some of the mind share and market share, but the only thing you can really do about that is to be more competitive, build better tools.
That's right.
That, or drive away your customers by charging higher and higher prices until you price everybody out, and then you've just eaten your own
dreams.
Whatever.
That one sounds like it'll work great, so we'll see how it goes.
Right. Yeah. Cool, guys. Well, I wanted to end on a fun question, also from Omar. He said, "What is everyone drinking here?" First of all,
I'm drinking a huge. Well, I've got a whole pot of morning red tea from. It's just tea. I have my tea black.
Delicious.
Does look good.
Nice. I got coffee.
You drink straight out of the. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like here's my pot of tea. I don't drink it straight out.
Jonathan, what are you drinking? What, Williamson?
I did have a beer. It was a New England IPA.
Did you make that yourself?
I did.
Nice.
I can't believe you. That's just awesome. I have nothing, but since we started, I have been desperately wanting a cup of tea. Yeah.
Has that been a subliminal message that I've been passing to you somehow?
For the beginning. Yeah. Well, awesome, guys. Thanks so much for doing that. Thanks. It was really insightful. I hope you guys got some, there wasn't like strict advice, but I think there was stuff to glean from experienced people about a healthy relationship with our software and with the movement, the way of life, as someone called it, that Blender can certainly be. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next week, and have a great rest of your, what is today? Tuesday.
Good. Thanks for hosting, Kent.
Oh, absolutely.
Wednesday.
See you guys. You have a good
Awesome.
one.
Yeah.
Talk to y'all later.
Yeah.